Um, so we'll get started here and kick off our final session. Again, this is Big Climate Change, How to Survive and Thrive When Your Planetarium Weathers a Disaster, a case study of the Robeson Planetarium and Project Phoenix. This is Ken Brandt and Tim Barry.
Hi, everybody. This is Tim Barry, and I'm in Santa Fe, and you'll hear from Ken in a minute from the direct line of the hurricane cone path. So we just finished a great session on storytelling. Thank you, everyone. This is a story, a continuing story. So you can see on the first slide the track of Hurricane Matthew, which is the story that we're talking about. Next slide, please. We wrote this as a workshop, and it really is about rainfall and about flooding, not so much hurricanes, but we wanted to be a workshop, so we'd like to devote, rather than show a lot of slides, we'd like to spend about half time listening to your questions about the disaster that we are now experiencing with COVID. So we want to try to help you understand Ken's experience and what we've been working on there, and how that might help you deal with COVID today. So next slide, please. So this is, as Michael mentioned, this is about, let's see, 20 hours ago. This is the track of Hurricane Isaias, where Ken is. So Ken, take it away from the hurricane, please.
Hey, this is Ken Brandt, the director of the Robeson Planetarium and Science Center in Lumberton, North Carolina, USA. We opened our doors in 1969, and at that time, the planetarium was conceived, written, and produced by Jimmy Hooks, who most of you know. If you've been in IPS for a while, Jimmy's one of the early presidents of IPS back in the late 70s, early 80s. And there he and I are shaking hands celebrating the 50th anniversary of the planetarium and the presentation of an IPS special commendation that was given to him on that night. Next slide, please. So this is the Robeson Planetarium. Like many 30-foot domes built in the late 1960s, as you already know. Many planetaria in the United States were built during that time as we were ramping up for the race to the moon with the Soviets. This is the result of a Title III education grant that was given to us to build the planetarium. If all the different communities of Robeson County would sit down together and work together. One time there was 8 different school districts, and now there's only 1. And one of the reasons why they unified back in 1989 was the fact that they already had this planetarium working for about 20 years. So this is the planetarium pre-Hurricane Matthew. Next slide. That's the spaghetti model for Hurricane Matthew. And as you can see, no one had any idea where this storm was going to go. Somewhere in the Atlantic, somewhere in the eastern seaboard was all they could do. The one spaghetti model on the end there is the closest one to actually being accurate, the one furthest north, and that actually takes a bite out of North Carolina. That's the one that Hurricane Matthew, with the exception of traveling up the Atlantic coast, did closest. So we ended up with about 25 inches of rain in about 6 hours. So you can imagine what that did to our watershed. Next slide, please. That's our watershed. About 2 days after the actual hurricane, crystal clear blue skies, 2 meters of water. And as you might guess, planetariums and science centers don't do well in that environment. Next slide, please. That's as the water's starting to recede. The yellow boundaries there are trying to contain a sewage spill and also a diesel oil leak that had happened on the property adjacent to ours. So the EPA had come in and they were trying to contain the spill. Since diesel floats, they were trying to contain the spill of diesel with these yellow pontoons. Next slide. That is a Spitz model A3P projector, not quite standing up anymore. After 6 days of solid inundation, the particle board over to the right there, I'll move my cursor, hopefully you can see it, but the particle board just dissolved, and the 400 pounds or so of machinery cantered over onto its side, and the entire planetarium and everything was ruled a total loss. So none of it could have been replaced. with exception of some spare parts on the projector ball itself and on the cage and things like that. Next slide. So again, another view of the same scene. Next slide. And that's the mold, black mold on the dome, which is metal, of course. And so to have mold form on metal, it had to be pretty humid in there, and that's exactly what happened. Next slide. And that's a headrest for one of the seats, and this explains the importance of cleaning your headrests on your seats regularly. And that's just the mold growing where the grease was. Next slide. And this is shortly after the hurricane. I went in there, tried to take stock of everything. In the foreground on the lawn there is a Mars map from the Buzz Aldrin Foundation. They gave 35 maps out across the United States. We were one of the sites that got the map. We literally laid this thing down a week before the hurricane. We had no idea the hurricane was coming to us at that time. Of course, the Starlab inflatable, you can see that I was trying to salvage that as well, but it also suffered severe mold damage, and we ended up destroying it. So that was the end of that. So I got busy. Next slide, please. And I started to make a plan. Okay, my inflatable's out. I need to order another one. Fortunately, I had the budget to be able to order an inflatable. And I ordered an inflatable, and pretty quickly on worked out a partnership with Tim Little at the Partnership for Children in Lumberton to use their auxiliary room or their multi-purpose room as a place to inflate an inflatable dome. Now, this is a very active facility, and they were willing to give us, in some senses, their most often used space to inflate our planetarium so we could continue to see our main clientele, which is our school children. Next slide, please. So this is me getting ready in 2018 for Hurricane Florence. Hurricane Florence we knew was coming, and for 5 days out we were prepared. So that's me in my garage, parking my Prius with my inflatable system, seeking higher ground. So yeah, me looking pretty forlorn because here we go again. Next slide, please. Now, that's the inflatable as it stands now. In the multi-purpose room downtown Lumberton. And once we start seeing people again, that's where we'll go with the kids. Next slide, please. So after we had this happen, rebuilding the planetarium became the next big thing to me. And so I took the advice of a friend of mine and formed an advisory board. And that advisory board is called the Rising Phoenix. And Rising Phoenix is built, it's members of the community leaders that are trying to get the planetarium rebuilt. They're seeking donations, they're looking for other ways to leverage support in our community to get our planetarium rebuilt and much finer than it was. And speaking of rebuilding, the person designing the rebuild is none other than Tim Barry. Tim agreed to provide his services to us pro bono after I spoke at a conference in St. Louis, the Pleiades conference in 2017. Tim pulled me off to the side and he said, look, Ken, I think I can help you. And Tim has been instrumental in keeping me afloat mentally and also inspired by what's possible in our planetarium. Next slide, please. Okay, Tim, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, actually, why don't you just run back one slide there, Michael? Ken, that's a great story. Thank you. I appreciate your kind words. But clearly you were well prepared for the disaster or multiple disasters. But now that everybody's dealing with COVID and perhaps other challenges as well, what advice would you offer to planetariums to help preparation?
Well, first thing I'd tell you to do is have a plan before disaster hits. Well, that's too late. We're 4 months into it now, obviously. So having a plan, executing your plan. Keep your planetarium's name out there in the local community, keep it active in the regional community, and of course, keep it active in the professional community, which is what we're doing right now. Want to make sure that the planetarium doesn't get lost in all the other duress that is COVID related. And, you know, see what other people are doing. Other people are doing fantastic things virtually. I started doing virtual programs about a week after we closed down, and I've been doing them ever since. And those virtual programs have the effect of keeping our name out there in the field. Okay, Tim.
Thanks, Ken. Well, your success in continuing teaching was really amazing. So you were able to get your mobile program back up and running and find a temporary location and really continue teaching without interruption. So that's amazing. Everybody's facing the same circumstance with COVID now. So clearly you were able to immediately respond and you were flexible at the same time. So what advice would you have with respect to responsiveness and flexibility?
Number one, patience. Number two, understand the full range of what your facility can do. I'm kind of limited by our size and our primary target audience in terms of when we're going to open up, because obviously we can't open up, even think about opening up until the schools reopen up. Right now, we're all virtual, at least until the end of September in North Carolina, in this part of North Carolina anyway. It's a county by county decision in North Carolina. And so we decided to go virtual until October. And so until then, I'm not even starting to think about how we're going to actually go back into the inflatable. I've collected all sorts of data and resources and feedback from other professionals in the field, especially Carlos, and I can't remember your last name in Costa Rica. Your research where you found that only 6 people could distance in a 6-meter dome. That's very influential. Tim?
Yeah, so that's good short-term and immediate-term advice. But Ken, you know, you've been in there for a long haul now, several years since Matthew and subsequent hurricanes. But you created a team, you assembled a board, you established a nonprofit, and then you just kept pursuing every avenue until you were able to secure funding to rebuild the planetarium for the long term. So you had a lot of long-term creativity and a lot of diligence. What would you share for COVID with respect to that?
I would share that continue to be resourceful and be patient, because things are not going to change tomorrow. You know, it is going to be happening for a while, depending on where you live in the world. Right now in the United States, things are pretty bad, obviously. But hopefully your situation's a little better. Hopefully the larger theaters are starting to reopen. And so that's encouraging. And of course, I'm following stories like Jay Lamb's story down at the Pennington in Baton Rouge, and his continuing saga of reopening and how it's happening. So that's one source I've been watching eagerly to see their progress in order that we might mimic their progress later. Tim?
So Ken, that's great. Michael, before we open it up to the audience, I did get one question in advance from my colleagues. We want to welcome again Maki and Victor from the STARS program, South Texas Astronomical Society. They're a new member of IPS, and they just weathered Hurricane Hannah, so they have some good questions. And I'm going to take the first question, and I, on behalf of the Design and Operations Committee for IPS, the question was, what resources or emergency procedures do we have online or available from IPS? And I think that's something that our committee can certainly tackle. So I will pursue that question to find resources and get them back out there available to everybody for emergency procedures. And then the bigger questions were related to how about funding and what's the future of funding and what are the sources for nonprofits, for institutions, for educational. So to me, that's a great question that we would like to welcome the audience to participate in. And Michael, I'm going to turn it back over to you for the general Q&A.
All right, of course, if you have any questions for Ken and for Tim, please feel free to put those into the chat and we'll be able to pass those along. But Ken, I think we also had a question from Victor about things having to do with planetariums being essential, fighting backlash of people who might say planetariums aren't essential enough to reopen during the pandemic. So could you speak to that for a bit?
I'd be happy to. Planetaria are an essential feature of any community because they're unique. There are many, many rural counties in North Carolina. Only 2 of them have a planetarium attached directly to their school system and operating in that manner. And, so it makes us relatively unique. Focus on that uniqueness. Focus on what makes it special when you get people under your dome and you shut the lights down and you bring the stars up. That ooh and ah moment is what makes it special. And then the story you tell afterwards cements it in. So it's up to you to tell the good story. It's not enough to just turn out the lights and turn on the stars. You have to follow it with a great narrative.
Great. All right. Any other questions in the chat for Tim and for Ken? Well, Ken, if you could give us a quick update on the weather conditions in your part of North Carolina real quick.
Well, if you've seen 1776 and you see Thomas Jefferson look out the window, and right now the wind is calm. The barometer is at 30.06 of pressure, and the precipitation is not yet happening. We've had a couple of rain bands move through, but the worst of this is going to be tonight and early tomorrow morning. All right, that's when it's supposed to make landfall near Little River, South Carolina.
Julieta has just given you a softball of a question. Do you see some of these events as an example of climate change?
Yes. It's the short answer.
That was why we put it in the title.
We're down here. Yeah, we're down here in beginning of August, and we're already up to the eyes and hurricanes. So that's 9 hurricanes and tropical storms already in this calendar year. So, the short term, yeah, there's definitely been a shift in climate, and it is continuing to worsen. It's not like something is going to get better between now and Friday. We are in a condition where the seas are warmer, the wind patterns are changing to favor hurricanes, and that's just, yeah. Like Tim said, that's why we put it in the title.
And Michael, I might put a footnote on that, on the bigger picture. With respect to COVID and everything else, these are really transformative times. Obviously, the complete context of our original workshop changed with COVID, but I have a colleague named Nick Farr who I worked with in Burning Man, and he's talked a lot about the long disaster. And everybody thinks about getting back to the new normal or whatever it's going to be. And I think there's a lot of fear, and I think the planetarium and our education programs and the fact that we are scientists and we believe in this. I think we are already examples of the future community that I think the world wants to be. So we've been doing this for years, inspiring and enlightening and bringing people together to a community. This conference today is a perfect example of the way the world needs to be. And just thank you to everybody who's joined from around the planet. And we will succeed in spite of COVID.
Yes, thank you.
Fantastic.